Change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that.
In the final days of winter, a quiet legal move inside Buckingham Palace began to ripple through the royal household. Prince William had taken control of a little-known estate, once tied closely to the late Queen's private world. And within hours, Camilla's family realized something important had slipped permanently beyond their reach. The quiet transfer. The morning was unusually still inside Buckingham Palace on the 27th of February, 2026. A pale winter light hung over the courtyard, the kind that softened the edges of London's skyline and made the palace feel, for a brief moment, like a place outside ordinary time. Staff moved quietly through the corridors, as they always did at that hour, carrying folders, messages, and the routine responsibilities that kept the monarchy functioning with quiet precision. But on that particular morning, a small cluster of senior aides gathered in one of the administrative offices on the palace's eastern side. Their conversation was measured, their tone careful. On the table in front of them sat a thin legal folder, nothing dramatic in appearance, nothing that would catch the eye of a passing staff member. Yet the contents of that folder carried implications that would soon ripple far beyond that quiet room. Inside were the final documents, confirming a transfer of stewardship over one of the late Queen Elizabeth's lesser-known private estates. The estate itself was rarely discussed outside a narrow circle of royal advisors. It did not appear in glossy public tours or widely circulated royal documentaries. It had never been presented to the public as part of the monarchy's ceremonial landscape. Instead, it existed in that unusual space the royal family often occupies between public duty and private inheritance. To the outside world, it was almost invisible, but to those inside the institution, the property had long held a quiet significance. It had been acquired decades earlier, during the early years of the Queen's reign, at a time when she was quietly assembling a collection of rural properties that offered refuge from the relentless rhythm of royal duty. Unlike Sandringham or Balmoral, which carried deep historical and ceremonial meaning, this estate served a far more discreet purpose. It was a place where the Queen could retreat without spectacle, a place where the machinery of monarchy briefly slowed. For years, it remained a small but steady thread in her private world. Yet following the Queen's passing and the transition of the monarchy under King Charles, questions began to surface about how certain private properties should be managed in the years ahead. The royal household was gradually conducting a review of holdings, some large, some modest, examining how they fit into the institution's evolving structure. That quiet review eventually reached the estate, and by late February, a decision had been made. Prince William, now firmly established as Prince of Wales, would assume direct oversight of the property. On paper, the move was entirely logical. The Prince of Wales traditionally oversees significant portions of the monarchy's private land holdings through a network of trusts and advisory boards. Bringing the estate under William's supervision simply aligned it with the broader structure already governing other royal assets. It was tidy, administrative, sensible. But royal decisions, even the quietest ones, rarely exist in isolation. Within the palace, several advisors understood immediately that the transfer carried a more complicated emotional landscape than the paperwork suggested. Because over the years, the estate had gradually become associated with more than just the Queen's private routines. It had also become loosely connected to the extended social orbit of Queen Camilla's family, not through formal arrangements, not through legal ownership, but through a series of quiet habits that had developed over time. During the later years of the Queen's reign, when Camilla had firmly taken her place beside King Charles, members of her extended family occasionally appeared at informal gatherings tied to the property. Weekend visits, seasonal celebrations, small private moments that unfolded far from the public eye. None of it had ever been official. Yet in royal households, repetition can slowly transform convenience into expectation. By the time the legal transfer papers were finalized that February morning, several palace aides were already aware that the change might not be received calmly by everyone who had grown accustomed to the estate's quiet availability. Prince William himself approached the decision with a characteristically practical mindset. Over the previous year, he had begun examining the monarchy's private holdings with increasing focus. As Prince of Wales, he was inheriting not only land, but responsibility, responsibility for how those properties served the long-term stability of the institution. The hidden estate, with its unclear traditions and loosely defined access, presented a small but notable irregularity. From William's perspective, clarity was not confrontation, it was stewardship. Bringing the property firmly under his management simply meant that future decisions about its use would follow a structured process rather than unwritten customs. Still, the quiet nature of the transfer was deliberate. There would be no announcement, no public statement, no press briefing. The monarchy had learned over generations that some decisions were best handled without ceremony. By mid-morning, the documents were signed. The folder was closed, and the administrative machinery of the palace moved on to the next task, waiting on the day's schedule. Yet within a few hours, word began to move outward through the intricate network of royal acquaintances, staff, and extended family members who orbit the institution like distant planets around a steady sun. At first, the whispers were uncertain, then the details sharpened. Prince William had taken control of the estate. The property would now fall entirely under the authority of the Prince of Wales. And almost immediately, a different kind of conversation began unfolding far beyond the palace walls. Because for members of Queen Camilla's family who had quietly come to see the estate as a familiar gathering place, the news felt less like administrative housekeeping and more like the closing of a door they had never realized could be shut so quickly. A property hidden in plain sight. Long before the quiet transfer of late February, the estate itself had already lived a peculiar life inside the royal world. It existed in that unusual space where royal property often resides, neither entirely public nor fully private, known to insiders, yet rarely spoken about beyond a small circle of trusted advisors. To understand why Prince William's decision carried such emotional weight, one had to understand the strange history of the estate itself. The property had first entered the Queen's orbit during the early years of her reign, sometime in the late 1950s, when the pressures of monarchy were beginning to reshape her daily life in ways few outside the palace could truly imagine. The young queen had quickly discovered that royal residences came with their own complications. Buckingham Palace was the administrative heart of the monarchy, but it was hardly a refuge. Every corridor hummed with activity. Every room carried centuries of expectation. Windsor Castle was steeped in history and ceremony. Sandringham and Balmoral provided distance from London, yet even there the rhythm of royal life remained carefully choreographed. What Elizabeth sometimes longed for was something simpler, a place that felt less like an institution and more like a quiet corner of the countryside. The estate answered that need. It was modest by royal standards, tucked away in a landscape of rolling fields and old woodland. There were no grand reception halls or sprawling ceremonial gardens. Instead, there were stone cottages, winding paths, and the gentle privacy that only rural England could offer. It was never meant to be a symbol of royal prestige. It was meant to be quiet. Over the decades, the Queen visited the estate intermittently, usually without fanfare. Staff understood that when the Queen traveled there, the atmosphere shifted. The rigid choreography of royal protocol softened slightly. The property became less a stage for monarchy and more a temporary retreat from it. Those who worked there often spoke of a different rhythm during those visits. Morning walks through the gardens, long afternoons spent reading by the window, evening conversations that carried none of the formal stiffness that usually surrounded royal gatherings. It was not the Queen escaping her responsibilities, but it was the closest thing she had to stepping briefly outside them. As the years passed, the estate settled into a comfortable routine within the Queen's private holdings. It did not appear in official royal itineraries. It was rarely photographed, and most members of the public had no idea it existed. Inside the palace, however, its quiet presence was well understood. Senior aides maintained the property with careful discretion. Invitations were rare, but occasionally the Queen allowed close members of the royal family to visit. It was never about status, it was about trust. Yet as the royal family evolved, so did the informal social circles surrounding it. When Camilla's presence within the monarchy gradually strengthened over the years, a new dynamic quietly developed. Camilla had always maintained strong ties with her extended family, the Parker Bowles relatives, who remained an active part of her personal life, even as her public role expanded. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, those two worlds began to overlap. It did not happen through formal arrangements. No official invitations were ever written into royal schedules. But from time to time, gatherings connected to Camilla's side of the family found their way into the estate's quiet calendar. A weekend lunch here, a private birthday celebration there, moments small enough to pass unnoticed by the wider royal apparatus. Within the palace, these visits were never treated as problematic. After all, Camilla had become a central figure in the king's life. Her family's occasional presence was viewed by many aides as a natural extension of that relationship. Still, there remained an unspoken understanding. The estate belonged to the queen. Access existed because she allowed it. And royal allowances, no matter how generous, are never the same as permanent entitlement. Yet time has a subtle way of reshaping perception. What begins as occasional hospitality can slowly transform into something that feels almost customary. By the early 2020s, some members of Camilla's extended family had grown accustomed to the estate as a place that existed somewhere within their extended orbit. No documents supported that assumption. No agreements confirmed it, but habits inside royal life often carry emotional weight that paperwork cannot easily undo. When Queen Elizabeth passed away, the future of many royal properties quietly entered a new phase of review. The monarchy was changing. King Charles was shaping his own approach to leadership. And Prince William, as the next generation's central figure, was gradually stepping into a more assertive role within the institution's long-term planning. Properties that had once operated on tradition alone were now being reconsidered through a more structured lens. The estate, quiet, obscure, and slightly ambiguous in its use, inevitably drew attention. From a purely administrative perspective, the situation was simple. The property had always been part of the Queen's private portfolio. Its future therefore required a clear steward. Yet clarity within families is rarely as simple as it appears on paper. Because somewhere beyond the palace gates, there were individuals who had quietly come to believe the estate would always remain open to them. And when Prince William's decision began moving through legal channels in February, few of those individuals yet realized that the gentle traditions surrounding the estate were about to change. Not with a public announcement, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with something far more final, a signature placed quietly on a document inside Buckingham Palace. William's calculated decision. The decision itself did not emerge overnight. Inside Buckingham Palace, major choices rarely appear suddenly, no matter how quietly they are eventually executed. Long before the transfer documents were signed in late February, Prince William had already begun examining the quiet architecture of the monarchy's private assets. The process had started months earlier, sometime in the closing weeks of autumn 2025. At that point, the royal household was still adjusting to the steady rhythm of King Charles's reign. The institution had entered a period of gradual recalibration. Old traditions were being reconsidered, small inefficiencies quietly addressed, and long-standing arrangements reviewed with fresh scrutiny. For William, this phase carried particular significance. As Prince of Wales, he had inherited not only prestige, but a vast network of responsibilities tied to the Duchy of Cornwall and the broader management of royal resources. The role demanded more than ceremonial appearances. It required the careful oversight of land, finances, and properties whose histories stretched back generations. Many of those holdings were straightforward, others were not. Some estates carried layers of informal tradition that had grown over decades, occasionally drifting far from their original administrative purpose. During several meetings with advisors in November and December, William began asking pointed questions about properties that operated in this gray area between tradition and governance. The hidden estate surfaced quickly in those discussions. At first, it appeared only as a brief entry in a longer list of properties connected to the late Queen's private holdings. But when aides began reviewing its recent patterns of use, the situation became less clear than expected. The estate had always been legally straightforward. It belonged entirely to the Queen's private portfolio. Yet its practical use had grown increasingly informal in the final years of her reign. Advisors described a quiet pattern of gatherings and visits that had developed over time, none of them improper, none of them formally authorized either. For William, the situation raised a simple but important question. Who exactly was responsible for the estate now? The monarchy had entered a new era. The Queen's personal habits, however cherished, could not continue indefinitely without a clear administrative structure. The young prince had developed a reputation among palace staff for approaching such questions with calm precision. Unlike previous generations, he showed little interest in preserving tradition purely for sentiment's sake. His focus tended to settle on long-term stability. If a system lacked clarity, it needed structure. If a property lacked defined stewardship, it required one. In early January 2026, William asked for a more detailed briefing on the estate. The report that arrived on his desk several days later was thorough but delicate in tone. It confirmed what many advisors had quietly suspected. The property had gradually become part of an informal social orbit tied loosely to Queen Camilla's extended family. No legal authority supported that pattern, but its existence had become difficult to ignore. Some advisors urged caution. The monarchy had spent years carefully stabilizing its public image after a period of intense scrutiny. Creating unnecessary tension inside the extended royal family was rarely a wise strategy. Others argued the opposite. Ambiguity, they warned, often created more problems than clarity. If expectations surrounding the estate continued to grow unchecked, the monarchy might eventually face a far more complicated dispute over access and influence. William listened carefully to both sides. Then he asked a quiet but decisive question. What would the Queen have wanted for the property in the long run? The answer, according to several advisors who had known Elizabeth well, was relatively clear. She valued discretion above all else. The estate had always served as a private retreat, not a social venue drifting beyond the monarchy's direct oversight. Allowing its purpose to blur indefinitely would have contradicted the very reason she had kept it so quiet for so many years. For William, the logic was straightforward. The estate needed structure, not to punish anyone, not to send a political message, but simply to restore clarity. By mid-January, the Prince of Wales had reached a conclusion. The property would be brought formally under his stewardship, managed alongside the other land holdings connected to his role. Future use would remain private and selective, but decisions would flow through a clear chain of responsibility. Advisors began preparing the legal framework necessary to complete the transition. The process moved slowly, as royal property matters always do. Lawyers reviewed historical documents. Administrative staff coordinated with the palace's property office. Several drafts of the transfer papers circulated quietly between offices. Throughout the process, William insisted on one additional principle. The change would remain discreet. There would be no public announcement, no press explanation, no visible ceremony marking the moment. From the outside, the estate would appear exactly as it always had, a quiet property existing far from the glare of royal attention. But inside the institution, the shift would be unmistakable. By the final week of February, everything was ready. The documents arrived at Buckingham Palace early on the morning of the 27th. Senior aides reviewed the final language, confirming that the estate's stewardship would pass directly to the Prince of Wales. A pen was placed beside the papers. William read through the final page carefully. Then, with the calm efficiency that had come to define his approach to royal duty, he signed. In that moment, the estate quietly entered a new chapter of its long and complicated history. And somewhere beyond the palace gates, people who had grown comfortable with the old arrangements were about to discover that the ground beneath them had shifted. Camilla's family reacts. The first signs of unrest did not appear inside Buckingham Palace. They appeared much farther away, in the quiet network of private calls, conversations, and messages that link together the extended families surrounding the monarchy. Royal households operate through layers. There is the official institution, carefully structured and meticulously documented. And then there is the personal orbit, cousins, in-laws, longtime friends, and relatives whose connections to the crown exist through marriage rather than inheritance. It was within that second layer that the news began to travel. At first, the information was incomplete. A property had changed hands. Prince William had assumed formal oversight of an estate once closely tied to the late Queen's private world. No announcement had been made, no explanation had been offered, but within a few hours the details became clearer. The estate that had quietly hosted a number of informal gatherings over the years would now fall entirely under the authority of the Prince of Wales. For some members of Queen Camilla's extended family, the realization landed with a surprising weight. Several Parker Bowles relatives had grown familiar with the estate during the later years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. Their visits had never been official. No formal arrangements existed that guaranteed them access. Yet, familiarity has a subtle way of creating expectations. A place visited often enough begins to feel like part of one's personal geography, and suddenly that geography had shifted. One family member reportedly described the moment with blunt frustration during a private conversation in early March. The estate, they said, had been treated for years as a comfortable gathering place, somewhere that felt loosely connected to the broader family network surrounding Camilla. Now, without warning, that sense of welcome appeared to have vanished. Another relative reportedly reacted with sharper language, interpreting the move not as administrative tidying, but as something far more deliberate. From their perspective, Prince William's decision looked like a quiet boundary being drawn, and boundaries inside extended families rarely arrive without emotional consequences. Inside Buckingham Palace, advisors had anticipated exactly this reaction. The monarchy has long understood that informal privileges can slowly grow into perceived rights. When those privileges are eventually withdrawn or clarified, the shift can feel abrupt, even if the legal reality has never changed. In this case, the estate had always belonged to the Queen's private holdings. No member of Camilla's family had ever possessed authority over it. Yet the social patterns that had formed around the property made the transfer feel personal to those who had become accustomed to its quiet availability. Queen Camilla herself found the situation deeply uncomfortable. By early March, she had reportedly been made aware of the tension circulating among some of her relatives. Those close to her later suggested she understood the logic behind William's decision. After all, the estate had never been part of her family's inheritance. Its future had always rested within the monarchy's internal structure. But understanding a decision and enjoying its consequences are not the same thing. Camilla had spent decades navigating the complicated emotional terrain of royal life. She knew how easily small administrative changes could evolve into larger family misunderstandings. And she also knew that William's position within the institution had grown increasingly important. The Prince of Wales was no longer simply the next generation waiting in the wings. He was already shaping the structure of the monarchy's future. That reality left little room for confrontation. Instead, the tension lingered in quieter ways. A few pointed conversations, a handful of uneasy phone calls, questions about whether the estate might still host occasional family visits under the new arrangement. Inside the palace, the answers remained deliberately vague. Future use of the property would be determined through William's office. Access would be considered carefully. Nothing more specific was offered. For members of Camilla's extended family, the message gradually became clear. The informal era surrounding the estate had ended. What had once been a quiet social space within the broader royal orbit had now returned firmly to the institutional framework of the monarchy. And although no one had publicly accused Prince William of targeting anyone personally, the emotional interpretation within certain corners of Camilla's family remained difficult to ignore. They believed the change carried a deeper meaning. Not hostility, not retaliation, but a quiet signal that the future monarchy would operate according to a stricter definition of boundaries. Inside Buckingham Palace, senior advisors viewed the situation through a different lens. To them, the reaction only confirmed why the decision had been necessary. Because when informal privileges begin to resemble inherited rights, the institution eventually faces a choice. Allow the ambiguity to grow, or restore clarity before the misunderstanding becomes permanent. Prince William had chosen clarity. And even as the frustration within Camilla's extended family slowly settled into reluctant acceptance, one reality had become unmistakable. The quiet estate that once floated between personal relationships and royal tradition now belonged firmly to the future king's domain. Inside the palace strategy. Inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction to the growing tension was calm, almost methodical. Senior courtiers had seen variations of this pattern many times before. Whenever a long-standing royal habit was quietly adjusted, the emotional consequences often traveled faster than the legal explanation. What appeared to outsiders as a small administrative shift could feel, to those personally affected, like a sudden rewriting of family expectations. For that reason, palace officials had already begun preparing their response well before the estate transfer was finalized. The strategy was simple: remain steady, remain quiet, and above all, avoid turning the matter into a public dispute. By the first week of March, Several senior aides had gathered in one of the palace's private briefing rooms to discuss how questions surrounding the estate should be handled if they continued to circulate within royal social circles. The guidance they drafted was carefully worded. The estate, they emphasized, had always been part of Queen Elizabeth's private holdings. With the transition of royal responsibilities following her passing, stewardship naturally passed into the structure connected to the Prince of Wales. Nothing more dramatic than that. No confrontation, no exclusion. Simply the continuation of a legal and institutional process that had existed for generations. King Charles was reportedly briefed on the matter during one of his regular afternoon consultations with senior household advisors. According to those familiar with the meeting, the king supported the decision, but expressed a clear preference that the issue remain entirely out of public view. The monarchy, after all, had little to gain from inviting attention toward an internal matter involving private property. But beneath the calm surface of those discussions lay a deeper calculation. Over the past several years, palace officials had grown increasingly aware that the modern monarchy required clearer boundaries between the institution itself and the expanding web of extended family connections surrounding it. Previous generations had often allowed those lines to blur, relying on personal relationships and quiet traditions to manage expectations. Prince William's approach signaled something slightly different, a quieter, more structured philosophy, one that emphasized stewardship over sentiment. Within that framework, the estate's transfer was not a symbolic move against anyone. It was a simple administrative correction designed to ensure that royal assets remained firmly within the governance structure intended to manage them. For palace strategists, the goal was straightforward. Allow the situation to settle. Let time do the work that explanations often cannot. And above all, ensure that the monarchy moved forward without allowing a small property dispute to grow into something far larger than it was ever meant to be. A subtle shift in royal power. By the middle of March, the quiet storm surrounding the hidden estate had begun to fade. There had been no public statement, no dramatic headlines, and no official acknowledgement from Buckingham Palace that anything unusual had taken place. From the outside, the monarchy continued moving through its familiar rhythm of engagements, charity visits, and ceremonial duties. Yet within the private world of royal administration, the episode had not gone unnoticed. For many senior courtiers, the transfer represented something larger than a simple property decision. It revealed a subtle shift in how authority inside the royal household was beginning to evolve. For decades, the monarchy had often relied on tradition to guide its internal arrangements. Informal customs sometimes carried as much weight as formal agreements. If something had been done a certain way for many years, there was usually little appetite for changing it. But the younger generation of royal leadership appeared to view that tradition through a slightly different lens. Prince William had already shown, in several quiet ways, that he preferred clarity over ambiguity when it came to the management of royal responsibilities. The monarchy he would eventually inherit would face a different world than the one his grandmother had ruled for 70 years. Public expectations were shifting. Institutional transparency mattered more than ever, and the careful stewardship of royal assets had become an increasingly sensitive issue. Within that broader context, the decision surrounding the estate made perfect sense. It was not about the property itself. In truth, the estate remained one of the monarchy's smallest holdings, far removed from the grand palaces and historic lands that defined the crown's public identity. Its real importance lay in what the decision signaled. Prince William was beginning to shape the boundaries of the institution he would one day lead, not through grand declarations or sweeping reforms, but through quiet, deliberate adjustments that gradually brought the monarchy's internal structure into clearer focus. For members of Camilla's extended family, the change had felt abrupt, even personal. The estate had become, over time, a place tied to certain memories and gatherings. Losing that informal access carried an emotional sting. Yet within the palace, the perspective was more pragmatic. The monarchy cannot operate indefinitely through unwritten understandings. Eventually, every institution must define its lines of responsibility. And in this case, the line had simply been redrawn. King Charles reportedly viewed the matter with a mixture of approval and restraint. He understood the reasoning behind William's approach, even if the personal sensitivities surrounding the situation required careful handling. After all, the royal family has always existed as both an institution and a family. Balancing those two realities has never been simple. But as the estate quietly passed into the stewardship of the Prince of Wales, one message inside Buckingham Palace became increasingly clear. The next era of royal leadership was already beginning to take shape. And if this episode revealed anything about Prince William's future as king, it was this. When questions of stewardship arise, sentiment may be respected, but structure will come first.